Good afternoon and welcome to City Watch. I am your host, Jeff Simmons, and today we are going to have 2 hours of coverage. You were just listening to a wonderful special on the Gulf crisis, and then after our show today, stay with WBAI for a special coverage of Cuban music, past and present Cuban music, Marisol was telling me about earlier. But for now, we are going to have 2 hours of discussion on the LGBT Pride March and also the other march that took place today, the Reclaim Pride March that happened earlier. And joining me in studio is a very special guest today, my husband, Alfonso Quiroz, who has demanded that he be here with me.
Yes, I did demand it. Thank you for having me on. I was really excited. I've been joking around with people that, we're sort of like the Lucy and Desi, where I'm asking to be on the show and he's saying no. Every time I asked, I said, can I be on? No, you can't be on. You can't be on. And this time it actually wasn't even an invitation. It was more like, oh, by the way, you're going to be, this is how he came up to me. He said, you're going to be real mad at me. And I said, well, why now? And he's like, well, because we have an opening, but I know you're going to be at the Pride Parade, so you can't come. And I was like, oh, hold everything. Hold the phone, folks. And so that's why I'm here.
And then after this, you are headed, probably near the very end of the show, you're going to be headed to the Pride March today.
That's right. Yeah, we're going to, the Pride March started already about at noon, but we're not stepping off till probably about 5:30 or so.
Who's we?
Well, I work for Con Ed, and Con Ed has got a float and a contingency in this year's Pride Parade, so we're really excited about it. This is the first time that we're doing it, and we have about 380 people, Con Ed employees and their family members who are going to be there, and so we're really excited about it.
And you work in the communications department at Con Edison, but are also a member of its what do we call it at Con Edison? The LGBT Pride?
Yeah, they call it the LGBT Pride group, and they're a bunch of great folks. I mean, these are really people who are working hard every day, and they're work very, very hard to put this Pride Parade and our contingency on, and so we're really excited about it. And I am super, super excited to be here. I promise I'm going to not embarrass you.
Okay, thanks. Well, I do want to let our listeners know that, today, look, we're 2 days after the anniversary of the infamous Stonewall Uprising, when the LGBT community stood up and said, no, we're not going to take this anymore, in a violent clash with the NYPD. That moment led to days of protests and fueled a movement, a new level of activism in the fight for equality. It wasn't and hasn't been just about tolerance, but acceptance.
That's right.
Now, 1 year after was the first Pride Parade, the Pride March that took place. And joining us right now is our first guest, who's going to talk a little about what has been going on today, is Cathy Renna. She is a media guru and activist.
Hi,
she has her finger on the pulse of today's march and much of this month's World Pride activities. Cathy, welcome to WBAI. Cathy, do we have you? Cathy? Well, we're going to have to try to get her back on the line. But what we also have coming up today, over the next 2 hours, you are going to hear from the president of the Gay Officers Action League. And think about that, because GOL was founded a number of years ago after Stonewall. I knew some of the early members, early founders, actually. Sam Ciccone was one of the founders and talked to me about the origins of the organization. And having covered the march when I was a reporter, the contingent of officers who participate in this Pride March usually gets one of the biggest cheers from the sidelines.
Right.
Now, you've marched in a number. Who have you marched with?
Yeah,
the
the police issue is something interesting because, in '69, the riot really occurred because of the police were harassing people at Stonewall Bar. And now the people will stand up for the officers as they're coming down. So that's a nice thing to see. It's a nice thing. It's nice that the community has all come together and welcomed these people and been welcomed with open arms.
And when you first came to New York City, you would have marched with, was it Mark Green or was it Andrew Cuomo?
Yeah, I've marched in it a couple times. I haven't marched in the last couple of years, but I did. I've marched in it many, many times, usually with a political contingency, either Mark Green, who was either a candidate or political people. But yeah, so it's a lot of fun.
And so we've got Cathy Renna back on the line. Cathy, welcome to WBAI.
I would say I try to get somewhere quieter, but that's kind of impossible.
Having participated for a number of years, I completely understand. So first, give us the overview of what is taking place today, the number of attendees, the participants. Let our listeners know who's participating.
Sure. I've been doing this 30 years. I've never seen anything like it. I've had quite a week. We have 150,000 people participating in the march itself. I'm standing by the grandstand, a little further away now because it's so loud. We just saw incredible groups go by. Literally every nation you can think of, Interpride, folks from Italy, Germany, African countries, Eastern Europe, celebrating World Pride. I mean, that's why we have got, the size of the crowd that we're seeing, as in addition to our Grand Marshal, which included the Gay Liberation Front, which I almost popped an eardrum when they went by and started to go by the crowd. The folks who formed the activist group in the wake of the Stonewall riots as we honor and commemorate 50 years since Stonewall. This is really, it's just extraordinary. I mean, we're all just there are a lot of tears on the sidelines. It's really kind of amazing.
Tell us a little bit about who Monica Helms is. I know she's your Grand Marshal. Why was she selected?
I'm sorry, I totally missed that. Tell us a little bit about your Grand Marshal this year, Monica Helms. Sure. Oh, absolutely. Monica, as she has been saying at every public event, is having the time of her life. Monica Helms is an extraordinary woman. She designed the trans flag, yes, about 10 years ago. She's also a Navy veteran. She's been fighting for trans rights for 25 years. And when she came down, we made sure that there were a lot of trans flags to greet her.
That's great.
She is wearing sneakers with the trans flag on the bottom that we went and got for her at the Fluid Project a few days ago. So she is absolutely thrilled to be honored, recognized, and also, I think for her, honoring all of the other trans members of our community who have been marginalized and not as visible. It's great to see the kids on the sidelines who are trans and out and with their parents, and see all the other trans activist groups. They were all right behind her, National Center for Transgender Equality and others, Trans Latinos. It's just, for her, I think it's kind of like the culmination of a lot of the work she's been doing for much of her life. And so very, very special for those who, we may not know their names, but they've been doing great work in the community, and I stand on their shoulders,
So I also do want to bring up, Cathy, that there are two marches today, and the other march that had been founded says that the march that you're working on has become too political and too commercial. Can you respond to those concerns?
Well, you know what? I'm standing in the middle of a sea of the most diverse queer people I've ever been in. And if they think this is not political, I don't know what's political. We are here. We're queer. We're not going anywhere. And the first, literally, I am still watching. The march started at noon. It's still going by. And I'm watching community groups. I don't see one corporate float. I think the problem is the divisiveness in this community, that we really need to just understand that there are a lot of different people who do things differently. We all want to get to the same place, but we may not necessarily agree on how to get there. And I think it's important that we, push these corporations, as we have been, to not just wave a rainbow flag in June, but to support our organizations all year round so they can do the work that they need to do to provide services or fight for equality. I mean, I understand the issues, and I get it. But I think that, if we're not unified, we got much bigger enemies that we need to deal with that really hate us and kill us and want to see us erased. So, I hope that their protest march was safe, and I hope that were able to get their message out, because I'm not saying it's unimportant, but, for me, to see the faces of millions of people along the sideline here who 50 years ago would have been terrified to come out, to me, that's what this is all about. Visibility is still important. We don't have our rights. We could be fired in half the states in this country. Trans people are marginalized. Trans women of color have an epidemic of violence against them. We know that. We say that. And I think it's really disingenuous of the folks who organize the protest march to say that we don't care about those things, or that we don't recognize them.
Well, and it's the one thing that I always said is that this parade is really about love. It's about going out there.
It's not a parade. It's a march.
The march. You're right.
We've always called it a march.
You're right. Absolutely. And tell me a little bit about this march and what is new this year.
Well, I think there's been all the Pride organizations are going through a real interesting time as Pride evolves. I'll give you one quick example. Yesterday, I was at Youth Pride. Last year they did it. They had 5,000 young people. This year we had 10,000 young people on Summer Stage in Central Park. It was one of the most energizing, amazing things I've ever been at in my life. And if our future's in the hands of these young people, I'm very hopeful because they see beyond putting people in boxes. They see beyond the binary. They understand intersectionality. They know they're not going to agree on everything, but if they can agree on, some things and walk out of the room and be able to work together, they get that. And they also understand that there should be joy in this. There's nothing wrong with celebrating. We need it. It's tough to be queer in this country still. And if you talk to people from around the world that are here, there's still countries in this world where not only is it illegal, it's a death sentence to be queer. So I think it's really important that we really understand what is actually happening around here. I get that, that there's a criticism, particularly of some corporations, but have that conversation, and the employees who really are the ones that are marching in the contingent and who push from within are the ones that are part of the community. And I don't think there's any good reason to exclude them, So when companies are quick to say to a state like Georgia or Tennessee or North Carolina, hey, pass an anti-LGBT bill, we won't do business with you, that sends a very, very, very strong message about the power of this community. We're not just a market, we're a movement. And I think that we have helped, frankly, move the community along because we've understood that there is power in having our culture here in the United States, especially, have business on our side.
So, Cathy, we've got just 2 minutes left. So I know that Mayor de Blasio, the governor, was participating as well. Any other, besides the mayor, any other presidential candidates participating today?
Kirsten Gillibrand is here, Senator Gillibrand. She spoke at our rally, and I'm not sure if there are others. I believe there is a large group. They haven't passed yet. Since we're still getting, here's the mayor coming by right now. I think that there's the Democratic Party and the Victory Fund both have elections on their floats, and who knows who's going to show up on them. There are plenty of Democratic presidential candidates to go around, that's for sure.
And finally, obviously, security has been stepped up substantially. Can you talk just a little about that?
Well, there are the folks at NYC and Company, who are the tourism folks for New York City, have actually started saying, given the numbers, that this may be one of the largest events, if not the largest event ever in New York City, ever. Bigger than the World's Fair, which went over the course of a year. For a weekend of events, we're making history. So, it's really, I hope that people understand that part of that is making sure that all these folks are safe. I was in Washington, D.C. for Pride, and all it took was the mere mention of a gun to cause a stampede, and thank God we only had, less than a dozen minor injuries, but it was really terrifying. And if the police weren't there to help secure the scene and take care of folks who are hurt and triage and contain the situation, I mean, you just can't do something this large without the presence. And I think, we know there are problems with NYPD. So how do we educate them? How do we teach them and help them better understand that they still do target trans people just for being trans? We're not going to do that by kicking them out and completely rejecting them. I mean, I think that strategy in 2019 is not one that's going to work.
Cathy Renna, thank you so much for joining me, Jeff Simmons, and my in-studio co-host, Alfonso Quiroz, here
Absolutely.
on WBAI.
Thanks so much. Have a great and safe Pride.
You too. Happy Pride.
So we were just wrapping up and talking about security, and that is going to, and police community relations. That brings us to our next guest, Brian Downey, the president of the Gay Officers Action League. Brian had begun his criminal justice career as a communications clerk in 2005 back where I'm from in New Jersey, in the Hudson County Prosecutor's Office. And in January of 2008, 11 years ago, Brian was appointed to the NYPD and served in the Transit Bureau, Brooklyn, Impact, and Transit District 30, and then the Special Victims Division. And he's currently assigned to the Hate Crime Task Force. Brian, welcome to WBAI.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Good morning. How are you? Is it still morning?
It's
good. Afternoon. We
It's
lose
good
sight of time out here sometimes.
It's afternoon, and I know I want to get to what Goal is about, but first, I believe you had a breakfast this morning, and I think I read that Tish James was going to be delivering remarks.
Yeah, we were very. We're always honored to have the Attorney General. I think the Attorney General, Tish James, knows what our organization stands for, and we're just honored to have her, and it's always great. She's a very big supporter of our organization, so we're honored to have her.
Now, Brian, can you tell us a little bit about what Goal is about and a little bit about the history of the organization? Because I don't think a lot of people have maybe heard about it. What is the history of your group?
I'm going to try and give you the condensed version. So currently we have three objectives. First and foremost is to provide networks of support for our members. There are still people that experience discrimination, whether it be at home from their own families, workplace incidents, which are a little bit different than maybe they were when the organization started. We don't see words written on people's lockers anymore, property destroyed. We just do see human barriers to queer advancement from which side of the criminal justice system. We also provide sensitivity and awareness training for our non-LGBTQIA plus criminal justice counterparts. We serve as advisors to executive staff on best practices and policies internally and externally. And we seek to build a bridge between the LGBTQ community and the criminal justice community. So we have our work cut out for us with that last one.
So, Brian, talk about your experience, because I know from knowing Sam Saccone well about what the challenges had been early on for officers to come out in the department. Talk about your coming out process in the department.
Well, my coming out process, until I joined Goal, I never really embraced my identity. I never really accepted my sexual orientation. I found a group of people in 2009 as a rookie cop that kind of took me in and really mentored me. And ironic that we're talking about this today, because 2009 was my first pride. My first pride ever was marching with Goal, was in uniform, and on Fifth Avenue. And I made a commitment to myself that day that by the end of the summer I would come out to my brother and sister. Goal kind of pulled me out of the closet. I never thought I would be doing this work: civil rights, advocacy, human rights, speaking and going to places I have. This is really the 10th anniversary of my liberation today. And in addition to that, I also want to put out there that it was the liberating part of being on Fifth Avenue in that uniform was I, like many other people, viewed, the status quo or society telling me what my place was. I was supposed to be afraid. I wasn't allowed to be open. I wasn't allowed to be honest, to live and love open and honestly. And I could think of no greater FU to everybody than having the NYPD uniform on, behind an NYPD honor guard carrying a pride flag. They now also carry the transgender flag. It's just absolutely amazing to me. This is a message to everybody that wants to harm LGBTQ people. This is a message to everybody that wants to discriminate, that we're here, we're not going away, and we've infiltrated the NYPD, and we're going to continue to do so at all levels. Today, in front of the Stonewall Inn, the Goal banner will be carried by Lieutenant John Hayes of the New Jersey State Police and Trooper Jason Christie of the New York State Police. Two agencies that need equity in our organization. They were given that honor of carrying that banner in front of the Stonewall Inn.
Brian, the story about Stonewall has got a lot of facets to it, and really one of the bigger facets is how the police department raided a Stonewall and harassed the people who were at the bar. What is that like when you're a police officer and you're marching past the Stonewall bar? How is the reception that you get, and really how is the community relations between the police department and the LGBT community? How has that evolved?
Well, first, that's a two-part question. So I'm going to tackle the second part first, okay? There is a lot of work to be done. I am not the person that's going to come on your radio show and say that this profession is not without sin. We are not perfect. People take this job. They always think they're doing the right thing. We need to make them understand that, we're not here to enforce societal norms. We're not here to bring our biases to work. And when we do training, the thing that I want people to understand, I don't sit here and say, this is history, this is this, talk to this person this way. What I say to cops and what I want them to understand is that I know I'm not going to change you. But what I want you to understand is when you put that uniform on and when you put that badge on and you're out there being the police, you need to be the police for everybody, not just the people that look like you, not just the people whose religious values you share. You have to police everybody fairly and impartially. Now back to the first part where we were talking about the Stonewall Inn. To march past the Stonewall Inn, we do it with reverence and honor. And I had a conversation with the commanding officer of the ceremonial unit this morning, Lieutenant Tony Giorgio. And I said to Lieutenant Giorgio, I said, I have a question. And he always sees it my way. I said, how come every year I've been on the job and I march on St. Patrick's Day as a member of the Emerald Society, I render honors to a cathedral? I said, can we render honors today to the Stonewall Inn? And can we render honors today to the AIDS Memorial on 7th Avenue? And he said, absolutely, Brian, it's done. We're going to do whatever you want today. So we march with reverence, we march with respect, and we march to send a message, like I said before, to everybody that wants to harm queer people, whether it be this country or whether it be in the world. And then they view the NYPD as a mechanism to protect their power and privilege. We're here, we're queer, we're not going anywhere.
Brian, in fact, looking back a few weeks ago.
I'm sorry if I'm shouting on your radio.
No, we're
on the route. So
we get
it.
Yeah.
It was just a few weeks ago, Brian, your police commissioner, James O'Neill, had apologized for Stonewall. What was your reaction when you heard about that?
It was a strong reaction. I mean, I had kind of known, I guess, a little bit that it was coming. I've had pointed conversations with the police commissioner over the last few years, including one on Christmas Eve in his office. I think that our organization has communicated very clearly that we were hoping to see that, and I'm glad that it came. And to his credit, I think he's the only police commissioner in the last 50 years that could deliver it. I don't think you'd see that with anyone else. So
I want to thank you for participating today. We've got about 2 minutes left, so I guess I would like you to leave our listeners with this. What message do you hope to send through the participation of GOAL members today in this march?
I want to send a message of hope to our community, and I think that's the way they see it. I have a young man here with me. He's 11 years old. I came into contact with him and his mom through Elvis Duran. He came out to Elvis. His name is Jaden. He came out to his mom, and Elvis kind of put us onto this story. Right now, he's standing next to me wearing a gold polo shirt, and he's carrying a gold logoed pride flag, and he's going to be marching with us today. I want people to know that we are here for them. We are a resource for them. We need to work together to heal, and we have a lot of work to do, and we need everybody on that journey with us. I think we're going to have a very positive response, as we always have. For 15 years, as an organization, we couldn't march in uniform. Today, in 96, we filed a lawsuit. In 97, we got that right. The community knows who we are. The community loves us.
Brian Downey, president of the Gay Officers Action League. How can people find out more about your organization?
You can check us out at www.goalny.org. That's GOALNY.org. And we're also, our social media is GoalNY, at GoalNY. Look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Brian Downey, thank you.
Be safe.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Happy Pride. Happy Stonewall
Pride.
50.
Thank you. So
That's great.
Now, before we get to our next guest, I do want to remind our listeners, you've been listening to City Watch here on WBAI, New York, 99.5 FM. We're also streaming live at WBAI.org. I am joined in studio today by a very special co-host.
You're so professional, Joe.
My husband, Alfonso, which means he's not at home cleaning the house and getting dinner for me. So let's just go to the more important thing. When did you first know that you were gay, and tell me about your coming out process?
Oh gosh, now you got the tough questions. Jeez, Sean.
No, Sean is going to handle all the phone calls. He's not going to answer your questions.
Darn it, Sean. All right, well, he's just going to have to listen to this as well. But I don't really remember ever a time being in, and it was funny because I went back and I was looking at some photos of me when I was a kid, and I was dressed in some flamboyant outfits, and I was thinking, who the heck was I trying to kid wearing these pink shorts and matching socks? I don't know who I was trying to kid that I was not gay, but I don't ever remember a time that I actually was in the closet. And I think coming out was sort of for some people, I think it's like this grand ceremony, or they have this great discussion with their parents. That never really happened for me. It was sort of a progressive thing, and it started when I was younger. But I do remember a couple stuff when I was younger. I remember once when my dad, I went out was shopping with my mother, and I found this fantastic bathing suit, and it was pink. And they were pink trunks, and they were fantastic, and I loved them. And they were from Ralph Lauren Polo, and they looked good on me. And I loved them. And I remember I was in the basement, and I heard my dad saying to my mother, "Why did you have to get him pink bathing suit?" And I was like, I thought, oh my God, that's right. I shouldn't be wearing a pink bathing suit. That's not what you're supposed to do. And it was those moments like that where you start to realize that you're maybe a little bit different. And there was another very important point that I remember is that and this must have been in the late 70s, and I must have been a kid. I couldn't have been more than 10 or 12 years old, and I was sitting Indian style in front of the TV, and my mom and I were watching the news, and she saw a friend's son at the march here in New York City in the late 70s getting married in the march outside of the Plaza Hotel. And I remember her saying, "Oh my God, what is going on?" And she was just floored by this and was upset for her friend. She saw her son there. And I remember thinking, as a 10-year-old kid, yeah, why would two men get married? That's so weird. And just remember feeling that that this was not a good thing. And so I remember from a very, very early age that I was very different than everybody else. So I never felt like I was, I was lucky. I was never, nobody ever came after me. I was never beat up. They did have a couple of nicknames for me. Which really hurt my feelings. I mean, one of the nicknames they called me in not in school, but in the neighborhood was Poof. And I remember thinking, oh my God, why they know. And what do I have to do so that they don't know? Do I have to change the way I'm walking? Do I have to change the way I'm dressing? You go through all of this stuff in your mind, and it was just a terrifying time to live and to try to think of these things, I guess.
So I do want to let our listeners know, you talked about seeing someone get married on TV. Marriage became law here in New York State about, over 6 years ago, because more than 6 years ago, we got married 1 week before Hurricane Sandy hit, which is why we didn't have a honeymoon, because he works for Con Edison, so we had to go to work for the next few days.
Yeah, it was a busy couple days.
You didn't want me to bring that up, but I figured I'd let you know.
It was a busy couple days.
So we're going to go to our next guest in a few moments. Am
I doing a good job, Joe?
You're doing a good job.
I didn't embarrass you yet, did I?
You're doing a good
He pointed
job.
this list of the words I'm not supposed to say, and I was about to say every single one of them, so I'm glad that you did.
So, again, you've been listening to WBAI City Watch today. I'm Jeff Simmons, your host. We are also streaming at WBAI.org. Coming up after our show at 3 o'clock, this is a 2-hour expanded special.
Yeah,
but
baby.
if you stay with us today at 3 o'clock, you'll be able to listen to Marisol Sordera with Con Sabor Latino's Montuneando con Marisol. She'll be playing new and classic Cuban music and sharing issues that are important to the Latino community and our allies.
Very nice.
So stay with us us past 3 o'clock because you're going to have some beautiful Cuban music after that. You're going to be headed over to the march.
Yes.
So with that, we mentioned that there are 2 marches today. We've talked about with Cathy Renna, the main World Pride March that is here in New York City. But there was the other one that has taken place today, and that brings us to our next guest, Francesca Barjon. Francesca is an organizer for the Reclaim Pride Coalition. She cares about the liberation of all people and believes that the most marginalized groups of people must be heard and must be fought for. Francesca is also an accountant, a mentor to high school students, and a writer. Francesca, welcome to City Watch today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So we understand it may get noisy behind you. We'll do our best. I'm hoping you can hear us. Talk to my husband Alfonso and I a little about the Reclaim Pride Coalition and the Queer Liberation March today.
Hi. So the Reclaim Pride Coalition is a group of people who felt like the New York City, the Heritage of Pride Parade, has gotten too commercialized, being used by corporations to show that they support our rights when all year round they're supporting politicians who don't support us. And also it's about being a more inclusive and safe space for people of color and trans people who are constantly abused and harassed by police officers. So we wanted to have a march without cops, without corporations, and the floats, showing that we hear the people in our communities, the things that they've had to go through, and we want to address them and make a space for them to feel like they can be comfortable, they can march, and they can be heard.
Now, when do you think the main march became commercialized, and what would you like to see?
The main march, I mean, I feel like over the last 20 or so years, like, I feel like the last 10 years especially have become just bigger and bigger with companies wanting to show acceptance, but it's partially a marketing ploy because if you know during the month of June there are these events going on, then they see, oh, this is an opportunity to improve our bottom line and make more money in June off of these people who want to have their identities visible. And I think what we want is actual change, actual consistency throughout these organizations. What do you do for your LGBT employees? What do you do for LGBT people in the world, not just your employees? I think it's called the Gaglers at Google. They asked to not be included in they asked for Google to not be included in San Francisco Pride because they said that whenever they would bring issues up regarding LGBT issues and things like that to Google, Google would not do anything. So it's like for a group of people at your own company to say you do not deserve to march says a lot. And I think there are a lot of organizations like that.
So, Francesca, tell our listeners a little about the march, when it started today, what its route is. If there are people who are listening who would like to join you today, what are the opportunities still?
So people are still coming into the rally at Central Park. We started at 9:30 at Sheridan Square. We marched up to Bryant Park and met people around 11:15. And so we picked up a bunch more people. And now we're at Central Park. So if you want to come be a part of this amazing day, the rally actually just started at 1:30. So it'll be going on for the next 3 hours. And then after that, we actually have a program with Indigenous people talking about this land and talking about issues that aren't often talked about. So we're going to be here basically the rest of the day. So come be with us, come find community, and come hear different voices.
And at 2 o'clock, there is a moment of silence, correct?
Yes, at 2 o'clock there is a moment of silence, and that moment of silence is for remembering those whose lives have been cut short, for the Black and other trans women of color throughout the country that have been killed for being themselves. So at 2 o'clock, we'll all take that moment. And this morning, we took a moment of silence at 11 for those in our communities who we lost to homophobia, transphobia, racism, sexism, to HIV/AIDS, to violence, to police departments and ICE and all the other forms of violence that exist in this world. And we just think that we need to acknowledge all of the people who have come before us, all of the people who have made it possible for us to live, but also all that we need to do to make it better for the people coming after us.
And as we look ahead or look beyond just New York City, I mean, my sense is that given what's gone on in this country, and you're touching upon that there are messages that you want to send to Washington through an event such as this. What do you want the federal administration to know about, the protection of LGBTQIA rights?
It wasn't supposed to stop with the right to marry. That was a stepping stone. We need the Equality Act passed. We need to not be able to be fired and discriminated against for our gender identities, for our sexualities in about 30 states in this country. That's ridiculous. Trans people, all people need to be able to go into the bathroom. They feel it's their gender identities. Like, these bathroom bills are ridiculous. So we're making a very clear statement, whereas other parades might just be love is love. Love is action. Love is changing the world. So that's what we're trying to do today, and that's what we're trying to show is important.
Now, Francesca, everyone that is involved in this sort of has their own path to each group that they're interested in. What was your path to your group? And talk a little bit about yourself and what gave you what was the interest in this group that you sort of you went to them?
So I went to a group, a discussion group called BiRequest, and it's a group for bisexuals. And the person who leads the group was talking about how this is the 50th anniversary of Pride, and he wanted to do something different. He didn't just want to march in the regular Pride parade. And he was saying how unfair it is to see these corporations making money off of us, how people didn't consider how much a lot of these corporations don't even have, like, queer people marching. Yes, allies are welcome to these events, but the people who should be showing their pride and showing we're here and we're not going anywhere are the people in the community. And a lot of times what happens at corporations is they've bought a certain number of slots and they're just trying to fill slots. And I don't think that is something that I was comfortable with, like, the more I thought about it. And last year I saw all the companies put up their rainbow stuff for June and then take it down. And so when he was talking about that, I connected with that. And I was like, I want to do something different this year. And this has been one of the most amazing experiences because I've seen people from all different backgrounds try so hard to make the most inclusive space. And this is what I ask for of people in my daily life. And to be able to do something like that is extremely amazing.
So, Francesca, one of the quotes I saw in a piece about your event today was in discussing the World Pride March that has taken place. The quote was, "The march has lost its soul." Tell me a little about that, your thoughts on that.
I mean, this march actually came from people who had marched last year and the year before as a resisting contingent in the Heritage of Pride Parade, and they had asked for certain things. Like, they had brought up the grievances that people in our community have with the Pride Parade, and the Heritage of Pride Parade said, we're not changing anything. And I feel like that's what they mean. Like, soul is about human connection. Soul is about accepting me for an event. Like, what say that they feel like it's lost its soul, it's lost its meaning, it's lost what people feel is making them feel like, I need to go out and march. I need to be a part of this. And a lot of people can't even be a part of it if they wanted to, because if they don't have a job or company or a nonprofit that is paying to be in that parade, they can't do it. Like, that is extremely classist and unfair that straight people who just happen to work at these companies can go march, and people who can't afford it or aren't in those spaces don't get to march. That makes no sense.
So, Francesca, we're going to let you get back to this rally just very quickly. How can people learn more about the Reclaim Pride Coalition?
At Queer March, DM us, Instagram, Facebook, search Reclaim Pride Coalition, search at Queer March on all social media. Thank you so much for speaking to me.
Thanks, Francesca.
Come out to the rally.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
So, one of the things I did recently that I know you, Alfonso, got upset I didn't invite you to was I went to the Democratic National Committee's LGBT event here in New York City. And in our second hour, we're going to hear from two of the presidential candidates that I recorded at the time and what they were saying to the audience. But the other thing I did want to get to was we touched on this before with Cathy Renna. You asked about the Grand Marshals, about Monica Helms. And I was able recently to speak to her by phone. Her audio quality is much better than mine. But about
We're trying.
She is the creator of the trans flag. But before I forget, I do want to mention that she's not the only Grand Marshal this year. The Trevor Project also is, and that I'm sure you've been seeing a lot around the city about them. They provide crisis intervention and suicide prevention services.
They do great work.
So regarding Monica Helms, she's a trans activist who designed the trans flag, and recently I talked with her and asked her about her military career.
Yes, I was. I spent 8 years in the Navy, and I served on 2 submarines. One submarine carried the missiles, and the other submarine was a fast attack.
And how long were you in the military?
I was in 8 years.
And what was it about the military that appealed to you?
What appealed to me was I got a low draft number, and what appealed to me was to find someplace not to get shot at. And since I knew that submarines were not being shot down over Vietnam, I decided to go in the Navy and then try for submarine duty.
And how would you describe your experience in the military?
It was a little dicey at times. It was very helpful a lot, though. It helped me mature, to say the least.
So tell me about your experience coming to terms with your identity.
Well, at age 5, I prayed to God to turn me into a girl. Now, that at age 5, the year was 1956. I couldn't read, and so what is a 5-year-old in 1956 who has no access to any information whatsoever and can't read? What does that child think if they are asking God to turn them into a girl? That if that child's a boy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people say, "Oh, you chose this life." I don't think so. And that to me, praying to God at age 5 is a proof that I sure didn't choose this life. Now, it took God 41 years to actually answer my prayer, so I guess for God, that's probably overnight delivery.
And at what point did you transition, if I'm using the right word?
Yes. I realized I needed to transition in 1987, and I was 36 years old at the time, and I did not get a chance to actually transition till 1997, so 10 years later.
And by that point, you had been out of the Navy?
Quite a bit, yes. I got out of the Navy in 1978.
Oh. And so, from what I understand, you had relocated to Phoenix, Arizona, and you were living there at the time that you transitioned?
Well, not relocated. That was where I spent most of my life. Got there at 18 months old, and so I lived there a good portion of my life. Except for when I was in the Navy and a couple other things.
And so, from the people I've talked with, you have the distinction of creating the transgender pride flag, which was created in 1999. Can you talk a little about what went through your mind, how you came up with this idea, and what you wanted to convey with the design?
Well, at the time I was part of the National Bisexual Group, INET USA, and I was having dinner with the person who created the bisexual flag, and he said, you know, the transgender community could probably use a flag too. And I go, okay, but I thought about it and everything, and he said, there's one thing to keep in mind. Keep it simple, because the least amount of stitches that they have to put in, the cheaper it is to make. And so about 2 weeks later, I woke up one morning, and while I was lying in bed, this design came to me. And so I jumped up and got out some markers, and I drew it out, and it looked pretty good. So I contacted the company that made the bisexual pride flag, and they sent me some swatches, and I picked out the colors I wanted, and a week later they sent me a flag.
And was there something that factored into your choice of color?
Well, the design, like I said, the design came to me, but I realized what the colors stood for. The light blue is the traditional color for baby boys, and pink is traditional color for baby girls, and that's signifying the bisexual or bigender world, the binary. But then the white stripe in the middle is for anybody who is not, who feels they're not part of the binary, that they feel that being male or female doesn't fall in with them, and so that's what the white stripe was for.
And where and when was the flag first displayed or flown?
Well, about a month later, I had an article in the local LGBT news in Phoenix. That was the first time anybody saw it. But then I took it to various trans events, and but the first time it was displayed really publicly was the 2000 Phoenix Pride Festival. I was marching in the color guard, and so I carried the flag, and people were wondering what it was, asking me about it and everything.
And where's the original flag now?
Well, 15 years from the day, well, I have to start, let me start a little bit sooner than that. In 2013, I started seeing pride festivals from all over the world, pictures online, and I saw the flag there. I go, they're using my flag. and you know, I saw colors in different countries, the pattern the same, and I go, oh my God, this thing is spreading. People are actually using it. I didn't design it for a lot of people to use, because I wasn't thinking that that's what would happen. I figured that I would have it, and that's good enough for me. But it apparently caught on, and people started using it. And I go, I have the original flag. I need to find a home for this, because I need to have it protected. And so I decided to start at the top. I contacted the Smithsonian, and we talked about it. And 15 years to the day that I created it, I donated the original one to the Smithsonian. And so they have it stored away, occasionally bringing it out for various events and things that they need to. And in 2016, it was displayed at the White House. President Obama asked for that.
So you also founded the Transgender American Veterans Association back in 2003 and served as its president for a decade. How has the association evolved and grown over time?
Well, 8.5 years after we were formed, we reached our mission statement, and that mission was to have trans people treated equally and fairly throughout the entire VA. The trans people were treated in all kinds of different ways in different VAs. Some people would get really good treatment, and others would just get turned away for anything. So we knew that there was a problem, and it needed to be fixed. But we did, and after, like I said, 8.5 years, it finally got done. Now the organization is headed by some really wonderful people, and their fight now is the transgender military ban.
In fact, that was where I was going to go next. Given what's been taking place on a national level, what goes through your mind? Do you feel that you're going to see more transgender veterans, speak out, more folks who've been in the military speak out against this? Because it seems like we have an administration that is just going to railroad through a number of initiatives that impact the transgender community.
Well, I think that we're not going to get anything done through this administration. We're not even going to. There's a lot of people that are, working on this, and they're spending a lot of effort. But when he is out of office, that's when things will change. That's pretty much the goal, is to get somebody elected that isn't him. And so that's really the important part of it.
And what was it in you? What was it in Monica Helms that led you to become an advocate? Do you see yourself as an advocate? I
do now. My history has shown that I've done this. When I finally started transitioning, a whole weight was lifted off of my shoulder, and I found my voice. I used to be a follower when I was that other person. My friends would come up with all the ideas, and I would follow along. But after I transitioned, I was able to feel that there was people out there that needed help in different ways. And so I wanted to be involved.
What is next for you?
What is next for me?
Mm-hmm.
Getting through these months and weeks through World Pride, and then there's Montreal Pride that I'm going to be going to, and it's like I'm pretty much focused on trying to take this one step at a time, one day at a time, because there's a lot of people. A lot of people want a piece of me.
So what was it?
There's all these interviews. This is the second interview today.
What was it? What was the experience when you learned that you were selected as the Grand Marshal of the LGBTQ Pride March in New York City, the birth of Stonewall?
I tell you, I cried when they told me. This is you can't get any better than that. World Pride is it. It's the biggest. And to be a Grand Marshal at World Pride is something that I could have never, ever thought that would happen. And it happens on the 20-year anniversary of creating the trans flag. So it's another anniversary on top of everything else that's going on. And so I was just floored.
Monica, tell me about the book that you have penned. A little about this. This is your life story?
It is my life story from beginning to today, or these days. I knew that one thing that people would remember me by is the person who created the trans flag. But I did so much more. I did a lot of different things as you asked me questions about. And I said, I am more than just the flag's creator. And so that's where the title came in.
When someone reads More Than Just a Flag, what do you want them to discover about who Monica Helms is?
I want them to discover that this person lived a very full, enriched life. That I tell people I feel that I've lived enough for 3 people. And I think that they will also experience what it's like for a trans person to not only transition, but to live this life for years and years to come, and what happens after transitioning starts. And so I'm hoping that they'll walk away going, wow, I didn't know people had to go through stuff like that.
So you were just listening to my interview earlier with trans activist and Navy vet Monica Helms, one of the Grand Marshals today. Other Grand Marshals in the World Pride March are Lady Phil, and also we mentioned the Trevor Project, but also the Gay Liberation Front, which had been founded after the Stonewall Uprising. The march goes on all afternoon.
All afternoon.
The last contingents take off somewhere between 4 and 5. There are 160 floats. 75% of the groups that are involved are nonprofits. You're listening to WBAI's City Watch, an expanded edition, so stay with us over this next hour while we continue to bring you more coverage of World Pride and Reclaim Pride. I am Jeff Simmons, your host, here on WBAI New York 99.5 FM and streaming live at WBAI.org. I'm joined in studio by my wonderful husband, Alfonso Quiroz. Let me say your name first. Alfonso Quiroz.
I am so excited to be here. I am so excited to be here. And number one, be sure that you don't eat all the food in the refrigerator for tonight. Okay. I am going to come home and I want that meatloaf from Boston Market. Okay. Don't eat that food.
No corporate sponsorship. Anyway, so I just mentioned just a short while ago that I recently attended the DNC's LGBT event here in New York City. They had invited a number of presidential candidates, and 2 of them addressed the audience. The third, Pete Buttigieg, was expected to address the attendees, but there was the police shooting incident that had taken place in his hometown, so he needed to return home, and
South Bend, Indiana.
And his husband filled in for him. But I was able to listen to 2, including one of our hometown representatives, Kirsten Gillibrand.
I am so honored to be here with you all and so proud to be a Democrat. There is no question that when it comes to the human rights of LGBTQ plus Americans, of history, and we are on it. This is particularly special Pride Month. Next week, we will commemorate the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, the match that sparked a half-century of revolutionary progress for LGBTQ rights in this country. If those heroes, and so many who've carried the torch since, whose shoulders we are standing on today, Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, trans women of color who show courage and defiance in the face of hate and oppression, Bayard Rustin, who fought for justice as a leader in the civil rights movement, Harvey Milk, who threw open the doors for millions, Edie Windsor, who proved that love is brave. We take these pioneers celebration as we celebrate how far we've come and recommit ourselves to the march forward. It's theirs and your bravery that has inspired me so much. We've fought and we continue to fight for LGBT equality. And I've been so proud to stand with the LGBTQ community for my entire career. People here in this room and others have inspired me to speak out as one of the first senators to support marriage equality and to lead the effort to repeal the Defense of Marriage Act. Your determination inspired me to spearhead the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. At a time when Democrats and Republicans alike said to me to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell that it wasn't well-timed, it wasn't convenient. I had to look Democrats and Republicans in the eye and say, when are civil rights convenient? LGBTQ Americans deserve a president who will stand with them, always, without hesitation. Unfortunately, all they have right now is a bigoted, petty coward. Donald Trump is a bully who goes after the vulnerable and punches down. He's demeaned and attacked LGBTQ people at every turn. As president, I will undo the harmful policies that he's created, defend the human rights of LGBTQ Americans, and I will go further with proactive policies to ensure all Americans can live free from discrimination and bigotry. A couple of weeks ago, on the first day of Pride Month, I was the first presidential candidate to announce a comprehensive LGBTQ rights agenda, which no one has yet matched. First, I will do everything I can to enshrine equal rights for LGBTQ individuals into law at every level of society. I am a proud original co-sponsor of the Equality Act, and when it comes to my desk as president, I will sign it into law. As Commander-in-Chief, I will undo Trump's hateful and harmful transgender ban in the military on day one. If you are brave enough to fight for this country, you deserve respect, period. And I will recognize a third gender marker in all federal documents. Second, I will fight for LGBTQ families, their kids, as hard as I would fight for my own family. I will permanently codify marriage equality as the law of the land and ensure that Obergefell versus Hodges can never be overturned. I will ensure that taxpayer-funded adoption and child welfare agencies can't discriminate against LGBTQ foster or adoptive families, and I will require insurance companies to cover fertility treatments like IVF. I will enact a nationwide ban on conversion therapy. It is long time past due to end this horrifying practice, and we will address the crisis of mental health and suicide, especially among LGBTQ kids. I will step up the efforts to fight bullying nationwide and increase access to mental health services. And unlike Betsy DeVos, my Secretary of Education will stand up for LGBTQ students. Third, I will guarantee health care as a fundamental right for all Americans, especially our LGBTQ Americans. Now, Republicans' assault on reproductive rights may be motivated by misogyny, but it hurts transgender and non-binary Americans too. I will protect the funding for Planned Parenthood and other Title X healthcare providers and protect access to reproductive healthcare, including abortion. I will ensure that our health insurance plans can't single out and exclude treatments for transgender people. I will repeal the discriminatory blood donation ban. It is absurd that this still exists. And as president, I will use the full power of my office to ensure that the newest and best generic PrEP drugs are available quickly and affordably. I will never allow the pharmaceutical companies to mask their greed behind a patent and prevent life-saving drugs from being readily available. Finally, I will put the full power of the presidency towards guaranteeing the safety of LGBTQ Americans. Hate crimes are on the rise in America, and trans women of color are being killed at a disproportionately high rate. Already in 2019, at least 10 transgender people have been killed, and one trans woman, Layleen Polanco, died in custody right here in New York. We need to address this crisis. I'll give no quarter in my administration to homophobia and transphobia that emboldens this violence, and I will direct the DOJ to put resources to better track and prosecute hate crimes against our LGBTQ people and people of color. And unlike our current president, I will stand up to any country around the globe, any leader who allows the persecution of LGBTQ people, whether it's Chechnya, or Russia, or Brunei. And I will work to combat the disproportionately high rates of homelessness among LGBTQ people, especially our youth. The bottom line is this: LGBT people deserve the ability to have the family they love, the family they want, the family they need, to raise their families, succeed just like anyone else. I will fight for that truth. Because LGBTQ rights are human rights, and human rights are LGBTQ rights, once and for all. We need to fight for an America where everyone is equally valued and protected, no matter who you are. I am proud to stand with you, shoulder to shoulder, in that fight. Please join me. I will fight for you and your families as if they were my own. KirstenGillibrand.com.
So that was Kirsten Gillibrand, as you know. We also heard that same night from Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar at the DNC event. And here's what she had to say in addressing the crowd.
Think about what you have done, all of you, helping the DNC, helping our candidates up and down the ballot. Because of your hard work, we changed the House of Representatives back to the People's House of Representatives. Because of your hard work over the decades, we have hate crime protections, on-the-job protections. You can get married, and clearly you can get elected. So I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank you for Angie Craig, who is our first openly gay member of Congress in the state of Minnesota. For one of my best friends in the Senate, my neighbor over in Wisconsin, Tammy Baldwin. And people say, can we win Wisconsin? I say I have one word for you there, Senator Baldwin. But my favorite 4 words are former Governor Scott Walker, right? So my state, the state of Minnesota, is known as the land of 10,000 lakes, but we also know it as the name and the state of 10,000 loves. And that is because we are a state that was actually at the forefront of gay rights. And my journey in politics actually has tracked some of the changes that we saw in our state. I remember being at one of our first gay pride parades, and it wasn't really a parade. It was more like a march, as you know, and there were people that were yelling things at people, and it wasn't that sense of celebration that we have now. But oh, how times have changed. I remember our state, we had one of the first gay Senate majority leaders in Alan Spear, was an incredible leader. And in 1993, Minnesota, in the middle of the Midwest, successfully passed a statewide non-discrimination law that included sexual orientation and gender identity as protected status. It was the first law that included protections for our trans community as well. So in 2000, when we lead up to this, I was the Hennepin County attorney, which means I was the DA for the biggest county in Minnesota. And I got an invitation, because I've been doing a lot of work on hate crimes, by the White House, Bill Clinton's the president, to go there, to be there when the president rolled out the Matthews Shepard hate crime bill. This is way back, right? And I got there, and I was just supposed to be standing up with him as he introduced it, but something changed, and they called me the night before and asked me to introduce the president. Please picture this. I had never even been in the White House before. I'm the Hennepin County attorney. So there I am, I write a little speech. I'm standing outside of the East Room. I've got Bill Clinton on one side, Janet Reno on the other. Okay, they're pretty tall, right? And all of a sudden the band, they made it a very formal event, and the band starts playing Hail to the Chief, you know, da, 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 da. And I start walking in that door, and all of a sudden I feel this big hand on my shoulder, and this voice says, I know you're going to do great out there, but when they play that song, I usually go first. That is a true story. True story. So that was my first visit to the White House, but it won't be my last. Okay, so one of the great endings of all time to that story is, you know, it took years and years, and I got to meet the Shepard family that day before we went out and announced the bill. I got to meet the cops that had worked on that case that said that it changed their lives forever. And it was literally nearly a decade later that we finally passed that bill. And I got to be one of the votes in the U.S. Senate to pass that bill. That is progress. That is progress. So you think of how far you have come, but we still have miles and miles to go. Because it is not right that in some states you can get married on a Sunday and fired from your job on a Monday. It's not right that if you drive across the United States on a cross-country trip, the laws and protections are different at every rest stop you make. And it's not right that the president could decide that transgender service members would no longer be able to serve in our nation's military and take away your hard-won rights. That is not right. And you know what else? And if you want to think of what it means right now, that we have this incredible Speaker of the House and this incredible group, many of whom you heard from today in the House, and that we still have a bulwark of support over in the Senate, even though Mitch McConnell has made a graveyard for all these incredible, there you go, there, that's it. For all these incredible bills that are coming over from the House. But think of what we saw before. House Republicans trying to shove not just one, but two discriminatory amendments into budget bills, right? The Adderholt Amendment would have allowed adoption agencies to discriminate against same-sex couples, and the Russell Amendment would have opened the floodgates to employment discrimination. Why do I tell these stories? Because they were only a few years ago. What did we do? We stood together and we stopped them from doing that. That is the kind of work that we have done, but what I want to see is progress. What we want to see is the passage of the Equality Act. We know we got it done in the House. All we need is a president that's going to push it through. I think we get it done in the Senate. A big part of why I am running for president is because I believe in opportunity. My background's a little different than some of the other candidates. My grandpa was an iron ore miner. He worked 1,500 feet underground, saved money in a coffee can to send my dad to college. My mom grew up as a teacher in Milwaukee, and she taught second grade till she was 70 years old. That is my story. and I'm the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate from the state of Minnesota. And now, I literally stand up here before you today because of opportunity. A granddaughter of an iron ore miner, a daughter of a teacher and a newspaper man, the first woman elected to the Senate from my state, and a candidate for President of the United States. That is what shared dreams are about. The simple idea that in this country, something that this president tries to fracture every single day. The simple idea that no matter where you come from, no matter who you know, no matter the color of your skin, or where you worship, or who you love, that you can make it in the United States of America. That is a country of shared dreams. And I'm running for the transgender person who wants to serve, or to go to school, or to just go out in their neighborhood without fear. For the young gay man looking for his first apartment or his first job. For the two moms who simply want to protect their family. The key here is that we not just win in the White House, but that we win up and down the ticket. And that is always, as Tom Perez would tell you, how I have approached politics in my state. Ask Angie Craig. Ask that ticket that we won on after Donald Trump almost won in the state of Minnesota. It is not good enough just to win at the top. You've got to work all the way down. And by being here tonight, you're showing us that you understand this. So let me end with this. This march that you started on, this march started a long time ago. But for many people, this march started the day after Donald Trump's inauguration. It started when men and women across this nation peacefully marched. It started the next day after that when 6,000 women signed up and said they wanted to run for office. It started and continued on day 9 when that mean-spirited refugee order came out and people spontaneously showed up at airports. Who does that on a Saturday night? People showed up at non-international airports. You go into day 100. My favorite march, the March for Science. My favorite sign. What do we want? Science. When do we want it? After peer review. That was true. On day 186, this is the march we are on. The march you take every Pride Day that you're going to take this weekend in New York. But on day 186, we defeated the bill that would have repealed the Affordable Care Act. We did that. The fighting Democrats in the Senate stood together and do that, and with that, we protected people who would have been denied coverage, people living with HIV/AIDS who couldn't afford their prescription drugs, and transgender people who before Affordable Care Act were flat out denied care. We spoke out and we won. And then on day 291, we won major elections. This was the first glimmer of hope in Virginia and New Jersey. One of my favorite ones was the one in New Jersey where the guy, on the day of the Women's March, who was a legislator, he said, "Well, I just hope they'll be home in time to make dinner." He got defeated, yes, a year ago by an African-American woman. Okay? In the middle of Minnesota is when Andrea Jenkins and William Cunningham got elected to the Minneapolis City Council. That is the march that we are on together. And then on day 326, in a victory for decency and dignity, Doug Jones won in the state of Alabama. That happened. That is the march we are on. You go forward into the spring when those Parkland students, they didn't just march, they voted. They voted, and we had the highest turnout we'd ever seen in a midterm, which brings us to the fall elections on day 655, when more than 400 LGBTQ candidates ran, and that night you made history. And what did we say? We said we are not just resisting, We are insisting on a better way forward. That is the arc that we are on, and work that you have done as the welders to shorten that arc has made all the difference. That is the arc of justice. So we have not an end to the arc, but we'll say the most important point yet, and that is the 2020 elections. So you cannot stop because of this march that has taken us to this point. We must rid ourselves of this guy in the White House that does nothing but try to fracture people every single morning with his mean tweets, going after immigrants, going after trans people, going after people of color, going after people in his own party that don't agree with him. This is our moment to stop that. So I am asking you to keep the march going, to keep the fight going, to not stop, to work every moment, to do what you can to help our candidates who you just saw in all their glory today. That is how we win in 2020. Thank you very much.
And that was Amy Kolbuchar, Minnesota Senator and presidential candidate, one of two who spoke at the recent DNC LGBTQ event. She was very good. It was a very good event. Also, she mentioned Andrea Jenkins, who also spoke then. It was a very empowering event. So on the line right now is a wonderful person, Bich Ha Pham, our co-host today. Bich Ha, welcome back.
Thanks, Jeff.
So we've been talking about World Pride here in the city. What is going on in D.C. today?
Well, there's hot as heck.
Here too.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think interestingly enough, there's a lot of focus on the 4th of July and the Donald Trump craziness when it comes to that his little parade, his little show he wants to do for himself and his family and his VIPs with taxpayer dollars at this point. But I think the parade here happened a couple of weeks ago, and it was an amazing event. I think that I don't know if there was much coverage in New York City, but there was that little bit of a scare in terms of the gun going off, and some panic folks. A friend of mine was not that far away, and he was like, yeah, it was kind of scary. All of a sudden, these people are like, yelling and running, and let's say, run, there's a gun, and so, but that was a while ago.
Yeah, these things can be very scary. I had one of those incidents on the subway once, and you don't want to be on the subway car as it pulls into a station when something like that happens. So with that, we are joined in studio. Alfonso, you've met my husband. He is in studio today.
Hi.
We're also joined by our next guest. Would you like to do the introduction, or would you like me to, Bich Ha?
Go ahead.
Okay. Our next guest in studio is JR Nexus Russ, the communications manager for the National LGBTQ Task Force. At the task force, JR works to help manage all external communications for and about the task force. Welcome to the show and in studio.
Thrilled to be here.
Obviously, you just came in from the sun, from marching. Talk about where you've come from today and what you've done so far here in the city.
So today, I started off my day at the Reclaiming Pride event, the
Queer Liberation March.
The Queer Liberation March. Sorry.
That's okay, because
There's so much going on this week.
I kept calling it the Reclaim Pride March, but it is the Queer Liberation March.
And that was quite something. So I actually came up for work on Wednesday night because Thursday morning the task force had partnered with Stonewall and the Imperial Courts of America to do a wall of honor, honoring 50 LGBTQ people and allies who have since passed. And it was quite something. And it was my first time at Stonewall. Matthew Shepard's parents were there. Harvey Milk's nephew was there. And I tears. Like, it was really emotional to be there in that moment, 50 years later, in that place with those people.
That's something.
Talk a little about yourself and the National LGBTQ Task Force and tell us what it's about.
Sure thing. So, again, my name is Jared Russ. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am actually DC native, so I'm glad to be up here not just representing the national work we do, but also some local flavor. And it's interesting. I've only been at the task force since January. Before that, I was working in local youth advocacy, including like youth homelessness issues. And it's been interesting to now have pivoted to seeing how these issues are affected by national legislation and policy and needing to do work on both levels, right? Like they both need to happen in concert. We can't have change locally if we don't have change nationally and vice versa. And since I've been there, it's really been a whirlwind. My first 2 weeks there, I went to Detroit for our annual Creating Change conference, which is really one of our key programs. We've been doing it just about as long as we've been around. And it's a way to build capacity within our community, to build advocates, and to share knowledge among people from all over the country, intergenerational, interracial, intercultural. And it was probably the queerest thing I've ever been to. And it's really amazing.
Bich?
So I'm not sure if the task force has been following this and focused on advocacy on it, but the Trump administration has proposed new rules that could impact the ability of LGBT couples and individuals to adopt children. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Sure thing. So these new rules are actually a rollback of existing protections that if there's an organization or entity that is receiving federal funding, they are not allowed to currently discriminate against LGBTQ people because of their gender identity, sexual orientation, presentation, relationship. And so these new rules are rolling that back, which is really frustrating because they're getting federal money. And to think that people could take public money and deny services to people, members of the public, is just kind of, I think, against everything that America stands for, or at least when it comes to like what we agree to do and what we agree to support and with the services we provide our community locally, nationally.
Now, JR, it's interesting because next year is going to be a election, and 2020. I know.
My favorite time to be in D.C.
That's right. That's right. But also, there's a census coming, and there's been a lot of talk about the census and a lot of different issues. And I know that you guys are doing stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about what the task force is doing to ensure that the LGBTQ individuals are not undercounted in the next census?
Sure thing. So we have a really wonderful advocacy team working on this to help queer the census. And even though there aren't necessarily questions asking about LGBTQ identifiers, as LGBTQ people, we exist at an intersection of identities, right? So just because it's not asking us about those, it's still asking and determining federal funding based on who is answering. So like it's important to show up to answer based on whatever 10 questions they are, because if we don't, that's just another way that our own resources, right, things that we've paid through for our own taxes are actually taken away from us.
Bich?
So I'm wondering, going back to the discussion about the adoption, the ability to adopt, the Trump administration Department of Health and Human Services also issued a proposed rule to roll back the civil rights protection under the Affordable Care Act. So, is that connected to the adoption issue, or is this more health insurance and health protection?
It is connected in that it is giving people the ability, and they're calling it the so-called conscious rule, to say no, right? To say no to how can I be of service to you to help you with the needs of your life. And it's all related, and I think it's part of why we're really trying to push through this Equality Act, right? Because all of these are just symptoms of a larger problem. And it's kind of like if they keep moving the goalposts, we're going to spend all our time chasing after these smaller issues when the root of it is really a systemic inequity that we are not federally protected, right? So the idea with the Equality Act is really resetting this foundation to expand the protections afforded by the Civil Rights Act so that things like this will be harder for any administration to do.
So I don't know if you got a chance to watch the either or both of the presidential debates, but when I was watching, it took quite some time. There was not, at least in the first night, there was not a specific LGBTQ question, but trans issues did come up. But I think it was like 15 or 20 minutes in that it was mentioned. How much of a prominence do you expect LGBTQ issues to be in this presidential campaign? And what would you like to see?
I would like to see, not just LGBTQ, but like you said, especially issues that are affecting Black trans women, right, at the center and forefront. I want to see their stories elevated, not just stories in death, right? Like we're about to have our next Creating Change conference in Dallas, and there's just been a rash of like horrific, gut-wrenching murders that have happened there, right? But we need to like elevate them in life too, right? And even within our own community, if we're not doing that, we are complicit in that problem, right? It's not just this is what straight people are doing, this is what cis people are doing. We need to address our own transphobia within our own community. And I think, especially with the 50 years of Stonewall, especially with the elevated discussion, especially with the younger people, these younger people are woke AF. AF is okay to say, right? It's an abbreviation.
So. It's not listed on the wall. Okay. You won't be in trouble for that one.
Abercrombie and Fitch.
Right.
Wait, no sponsorship, so we can say that.
But I think really they are leading the way, and we have a lot to learn from them. I'm saying that as a 38-year-old. I'm just going to put my age out there. But it's really amazing. I think next year is going to be incredible, but it's also going to be like probably one of the hardest election years we've ever faced. Like 4 years later, I'm like, is this really still happening? Like, is Handmaid's Tale really a documentary? Like, how are we living in this reality? But I think, self-care is important. Coalitions are important. Intersectionality is important. And I think the more we can realize that.
Oh, no, keep going.
Sorry, I was saying. The more we realize how much all of these things intersect with each other. For example, last year we were part of a coalition to restore voting rights to previously incarcerated people. And it wasn't just we were doing it as an ally. We weren't just doing it in partnership, but like I believe, if I remember the statistic correctly, 42% of women who are incarcerated identify as LGBTQ. So restoring voting rights is an LGBTQ issue, right? Yeah. Anything that systemically disenfranchises people will disproportionately affect LGBTQ people just across the board.
Mm-hmm. So you are listening to WBAI 99.5 FM and streaming live at WBAI.org. This is a 2-hour special of City Watch. Bich Ha is also on the line with us, and I believe you had another question.
Yes. JR, you're talking about intersectionality and the effort it's going to take to get the Equal Rights Amendment passed and defend in so many of these really important areas. Is your organization working with the faith community to try and get their support?
We aren't just working with them. Almost from the get-go, the task force has been part of a coalition of faith organizations. We actually have a wonderful resource called the Institute of Welcoming Resources, addressing just that. And part of the reason was people of faith are as, multidimensional as any other group. And the way that people of faith are sometimes portrayed, the way that, I'll just say, the conservatives seem to have a monopoly on a faith identity, I think it does disjustice to a lot of faith people who are queer, who are allies, who are people of color, right? And so because of that, it was very important for us to be able to talk through these issues through a faith lens, because this is actually like a moral issue as well. And I think the example of the conscience rule, like even calling it a conscience rule is like just horrifying. To say that it is, I'm acting according to my conscience to say no to making sure that you are living a healthier, better life, or even period, like you are living. Like it is against my conscience to make sure you live in some cases. So I think to be able to reclaim that faith, that moral high ground, to say that this is actually the good and the right thing to do. It's been amazing talking to some of my colleagues who are really involved with that faith work.
Now, tell us a little bit about what your group does to improve the relations between law enforcement and LGBT communities, because I think that's a big issue. And I'd love to hear a little bit about what you guys are doing.
Sure. One thing we did as recently as, again, I mentioned this Creating Change conference we did in Detroit, we actually had a panel featuring speakers who were Black and lesbian, and one of them was a Detroit cop. So it is very much about elevating those relationships within communities, elevating those individual stories and the people, because I think sometimes we get trapped by expressing our feelings against systemic oppression and systems that are hurting us with the people who are in that system, regardless of the work they're doing for better or for worse, right? So I think the more we can elevate those voices and tell those stories, again, like we did in Detroit, the more we get to separating the systems from the people, but also helping the people change the systems they're in.
So we've got just about 2.5 minutes left. I know, Bich Ha, you had another question.
Yeah, I think, if you could let us know like how to contact the National LGBTQ Task Force to learn more about it. And if you could quickly, I'm very interested in the work you guys are doing with the immigrant children that have been imprisoned in the ICE centers.
So to get in touch with the task force, if you go to thetaskforce.org, that would be the best way. I will say, while our advocacy department is great, I am not actually sure where they're at. So if you contact us, I will make sure someone who knows better about that issue will get back to you and let you know.
Are you guys on social media too?
We are at the task force on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram.
And what's your Twitter?
My Twitter is A Way of Life is Zero.
Hey. Is that your Instagram too?
It is.
I like that. That's a good handle.
Thank you.
That's a good handle.
So as we close out, though, I do want to ask, for people who want to get involved,
sure,
what are some of the issues where you most want the support, that you want want most of the help, around what issues?
Sure thing. So like I said earlier, in terms of really needing to be active hyper-locally, but also nationally, we are definitely a great national, coalition to get involved with. And especially next year, not only does that mean, getting involved with the census and maybe volunteering,
right,
but also making sure people register and get out to vote.
Yes.
Right? This is going to be a game changer. And I think if you can connect with us on that, as well as make sure we can help you plug into your local community, that'd probably be the best way.
And did you want to give it a shout out to who you're joined by today?
Oh, yeah. I am joined by one of my wonderful partners, Scott Cecil, who's also
Scott.
a local politician in the Mount Rainier area of Maryland and a really wonderful drug policy activist.
Welcome to New York.
Say hi.
Hey, everyone.
Hey. Happy Pride.
Happy Pride.
So thank you so much for joining us today. Bich Ha, any parting words as well?
No, I miss you, Jeff. Thanks so much.
It's wonderful to have you back on the show. Thank you so much. And JR, thank you so much for joining us in studio today.
And thank you very much for, this was my very first radio interview ever.
It wasn't that hard, was it?
Oh my gosh.
Were you nervous? Did he make you nervous?
It's also the first time I've had my husband in studio because he did call in once live.
I think you hung up on me, Sean. No. Somebody hung up on me. I called, they hung up on me. I'm not kidding.
Boy. So I believe, are you also heading out?
Yeah, so unfortunately I have to head out because we are going to meet my fellow colleagues at Con Edison. We've got a float. We have 380 Con Edison workers and their families going to be marching today. We're really excited about it. I got new shoes. I'm ready to march. I got some new shorts, and
you don't have that
we got all these great,
talked about.
Well, we've got all these great T-shirts that everyone's going to be doing, but it's 380 of us, and we are going to be having a good time today.
Amazing.
Great. Guys, thank you so much for joining me in studio
Happy
today.
Pride.
I didn't embarrass you, did I, Jeff?
You did not.
Thank you.
Go have a good time.
Wonderful.
I'll take this from you. So we're going to get the next guest on the line. You, again, have been listening to WBAI 99.5 FM. I am Jeff Simmons, your host of City Watch today during this special 2 hours. After we end at 3 o'clock, please stay with WBAI because Con Sabor Latinos Mantuneando con Marisol with Marisol Cerdeira. I got to say it right. Sorry, Marisol. She will be on playing new and classical Cuban music and sharing issues of importance to the Latino community and our allies. So we are now coming up to our final guest of the day, who is someone I have known for years but have not seen in quite some time because he moved to the West Coast. That is Troy Masters. He was a galvanizing force in New York City's LGBT media world for more than a quarter of a century. He founded and served as associate publisher of Our Gay City News, which was previously called the Lesbian and Gay New Yorker, LGNY, which I forgot about, and then rechristened as Gay City News in 2002. And then he headed out to the West Coast, and he's going to talk a little about why he did that and what he does now. Troy, welcome to WBAI.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
It's wonderful to have you on. So tell our listeners why you moved to the West Coast.
Well, there just seemed to be an opportunity out here that happened to overlap with a change I needed in my personal life. Honestly, isn't that why everyone moves to L.A.?
Because they love the traffic.
Yeah. And, well, there is the weather, but that's about it.
So, but also, you are the publisher of the Los Angeles Blade. And I know that we're going to get into a little of the history of Gay City News and why I wanted to have you on today. But talk a little about the LA Blade.
Well, when I moved to Los Angeles, it was to establish an LGBT newspaper here in a city that has never really had one. So I came out here, did a trial version of another paper, and it was very successful. but I felt like it needed to be a little bit more prominent. It needed a lot more credibility, and I wanted to bring sort of the trio of capital cities together to create something really vital for the community. So I engaged the Washington Blade in D.C., and we formed a partnership. And so it's sort of like a little New York, Washington, Los Angeles triangle of power that has now produced a paper, and it's going very well.
I like that you call it a triangle.
Yeah.
So take me back to Gay City News, and you founded this. Talk a little about why, where you saw the need and why at that time was this the right thing to do? I mean, when it was originally called, LGNY.
Well, LGNY came out of Outweek. I was a member of the staff of Outweek, and Outweek, once it folded, I kept some members of the staff together and all of the advertising base together. As I was there, I was in advertising and marketing. I just kept everything together after the product folded, after Outweek closed, which was a real, if you were in New York at that time and that particular Pride when Outweek crashed, it was just devastating. The community was so saddened. So I held everything together and created what was called QW at the time, and we were the nation's first glossy gay magazine. QW was a weekly, and unfortunately, the funding was really pretty much non-existent except for my partner who died of AIDS in 1992, and when he died, we shut QW down. I took a couple of years off, and in that 2-year period or year that I took off, I wasn't working, but I was extremely depressed. And one of the things I was depressed about was not only my friends dying of AIDS, but there was a lack of journalistic editorial reporting on the AIDS crisis and what was happening in New York at the very, very pinnacle of what was going on. So I created LGNY, and that went well until the economic crash around 2001, after September 11th, at which time I decided, okay, well, I'm going to have a partner now. So I went and joined The Villager, which is the famous newspaper that has served West Village for many years, and created a partnership that led to Gay City News. So that's my story in a nutshell.
And what prompted me to reach out to you was I saw that you had posted something on Facebook the other day about, what, you were concerned about, everyone's out marching today, but not really thinking of, some of the elements, some of the things that should be thought of or marked or honored at this time. Talk a little about, what your impressions are of the current, the annual march and what you want people to do on this day.
Well, first of all, what everyone should be doing today is just celebrating. I mean, it's just the most important marker of our community so far. I mean, you could be very critical about what it kind of looks like, the shape it's taken, and everything. That some elements of our community feel erased, other elements of our community feel that that's not an important discussion. But I happen to think that a lot of the corporations that are sponsoring us are our friends today, but they're also funding our enemies. They're some of the corporations that have given hundreds of thousands of dollars to participate in Pride are also giving hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes much, much more money to our enemies to fund the fight against us. So, that's just capitalism. It does work that way. I accept that as, a person who lives in the 21st century, I think, is that what century we're in? 21st century America, and that's just sort of what you face. But they put their rainbow on their corporation's logo for a month, and then they walk away. These agencies that are buoyed for the moment are deprived the day they leave. So there's a lot that there's a lot of good, and there is a lot of I wouldn't call it bad. I just think it's kind of thoughtless.
And you also, in your Facebook post, I want to quote a little from it. You said, "I'm a little aghast at how the AIDS crisis seems buried like a mere footnote to Stonewall," and in parentheses, marketing, when in fact it has been central to almost everything that has followed over the 50 years since. Stonewall should not be all rainbows and sparkles, glitter and glam. We died for the rights we should now rightly celebrate. Can you talk about that?
Yes, well, I'm not in New York, number one, so I have not. I honestly have going based on what I see of the visual marketing that's both online and what's been sent to me and reported to me by friends and people. But it's very, very obvious that there was an intentional decision to lower the volume on sadness. Anything that happened to us that was a struggle, and focus on what's jubilant and joyous, and that makes sense. It is Stonewall. It is a marker of celebration. But the most tragic thing that can happen to any community has happened to us. It's something that we can never, ever shake. It's something we cannot just bury under the carpet. The community is still traumatized by it and will be forever marked by it. So for it to be sort of just whitewashed or pinkwashed is really, it's just alarming. But some of that has to do with our leadership and the kind of direction that many of the nonprofits have gone. And, they choose to focus on elements of their messaging that bring in funders who might not have had any kind of experience with what we went through during the AIDS crisis, who might have been attracted to us because of what happened during the AIDS crisis, but who don't necessarily want to talk or be reminded about it.
Having marched in a number of the marches, first as a reporter covering a number of the electeds, I was there when Hillary was in the march, but having participated also with politicians as well when I marched, there were I remember there being the moment of silence. Some people surprisingly did not know what the moment of silence was and why it was held, which was troubling to me. But I think about where we are right now in our country. A half century later, homosexuality's been decriminalized in our country. More than half of our states still allow employment discrimination based on sexual orientation and identity. Talk a little about, because you cover this, you publish pieces on this. Talk a little about the country that we live in today, and how events like whether it's the Reclaim Pride's Queer Liberation March or the Maine World Pride March, how they can be empowering, and what you think people should do afterwards.
Well, they're certainly empowering. No matter what they look like, what shape they take out, the fact that there are 4 or 5 million people in the streets of Manhattan today, and with hundreds of millions of people potentially watching them on television sets around the country and around the world, this has like an immense, it sends out an immense message to the world about inclusion and acceptance, etc. And we have made tremendous progress, but obviously that probably our clock can get set back. There is an effort to do that. It's underway. It's not silent. It's just as loud as we are. The Trump administration has done everything it can and continues to do everything it can, even with smiley faces, to take everything that we've gained away from us. So, today is like a celebration. Tomorrow, the fight continues. We don't have any luxury of taking a week off tomorrow or a year, as I did in 1992. There's just no way to step back from this moment. We have a lot of acceptance, but tomorrow the fight begins again, and we have to pick it up.
Earlier today, I reread a piece by Moises Kaufman, who had written the Laramie Project about Matthew Shepard's murder. He had this beautiful piece in the New York Times, and he stated that all the progress over the last 50 years is, quote, tenuous and fragile. I as an openly gay man, I worry about what's going on in our country and about the rights that I have now that might not exist, given that we have a conservative court. What is there one issue that to you, you feel over the next year and a half, especially as we've got a presidential election going on, is there one issue that you think we should focus on?
Well, I think the biggest issue that we are going to have to deal with immediately, not something that I know, I don't have any advice on how to focus on it, but I can look at what's happening and tell you that the difference between religious freedom and freedom of speech is the next exploration. We are at a point where our homophobes are seeking their voice. We have to punch back. We have our own freedom of speech. They have their own freedom of speech, but we're about to get into a public arena fight about that. And I'm afraid that's where the next part of our journey lies. It's like continued pushback. Now, I noticed that GLAAD has come out and said that they want to pass a constitutional amendment giving us rights. And, that just sort of is alarming to me because, it's so naive and it's just not where we need to be right now, that kind of thing. Because what we don't need is a fight among the agencies about propriety and position. We need to focus right now. And I think I don't see anybody doing the work of focusing the community. I would say that's a big challenge, too.
And the Blade, your paper, had a piece by Valerie Jarrett, and she reflected that. She said, we must remind ourselves that the fight isn't over. How do you describe the level of advocacy today? Because if we, you touched on, the AIDS crisis before and, the rather public and empowering work that ACT UP had done, do we have that same level of advocacy the way ACT UP did to kind of move mountains? And, do we need that again?
We have that. I'm sort of like lost in an answer to that because today requires such a different level of kind of discourse, a different level of communication. I mean, we've gotten inside the door, we've gotten a lot of people's ears. Glossy is now very important, but so is raw. We've lost the raw part for the moment. We don't know how to tap back into that, and that concerns me. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, though.
So, but now I've got the toughest question because the show's almost over. The toughest question, Troy, is how can people learn more about you and your publication?
Oh, well, you can follow our Facebook page or Instagram, social media, whatever. But also go to losangelesblade.com and read the paper. Karen Oakham, who is my news editor here in Los Angeles, she's a pioneer, a founder of West Hollywood, the only LGBT organized city in the whole world. I mean, Karen has followed the AIDS crisis and has followed what's happened here in California for the last 30 years, and she's just a complete treasure of an editor. Working with Washington Blade has been pretty amazing, and you can follow WashingtonBlade.com as well. But yeah.
Troy Masters, thank you so much for joining me, and please let me know when you're back in New York City because I would love to see you again.
I will be there soon.
Have a great day. Thanks so much for joining me here on WBAI.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Bye.
So we've just got about a minute or two left. I really want to thank our guests today, J.R. Russ, who came in studio, lovely co-host Bich Ha calling in from Washington, D.C., and if I didn't say it, he'd kill me later on. My husband, who was in studio for much of the last 2 hours. His first time doing this. At least it means I can guide what he does, and he doesn't just call up while I'm on the show. But I also want to thank all of those who continue to be on the front lines of LGBTQ advocacy, whether you were participating in the World Pride March today or the Queer Liberation March. The goal being to empower and to continue the fight. Also, I'd like to thank our wonderful engineer, Sean, for juggling things as well as he does every single weekend. You can follow us on Facebook. I'm also on Twitter if you'd like to follow me. It's Jack Heights, spelled Hites, because I live in Jackson Heights. I will be back next Sunday with City Watch at 1 p.m. Stay tuned for Con Sabor Latino with Marshal playing new and classic Cuban music and sharing issues of importance to the Latino community and their allies. And, of course, happy Pride. Have a great weekend.